Ahoy, mateys! Welcome to Podcasts of the Caribbean, a podcast covering the world of Pirates of the Caribbean, from the theme parks to the movies and everything in between. My name is Justin Helmer, and I will be your host on this voyage through the Caribbean. It'd be too late to alter course now, mateys. Hello, and welcome back to Podcasts of the Caribbean. This is episode 53, and in today's episode, we are covering the third book in the Legends of the Brethren Court series, The Turning Tide. If you didn't listen to episodes 51 and 52 covering the first two books, I highly recommend doing so, but just for a quick refresher on what is going on so far, Jack Sparrow has been tasked by Tia Dalma to gather 7 vials of shadow gold from the pirate lords around the world to hopefully rid him of his shadow illness and stop the Shadow Lord and the looming day of the Shadow. So far, Jack has been to South America and all throughout Asia finding the vials, running into Eduardo Villanueva, Xiao Feng, and Mistress Ching along the way. In this book, the Black Pearl is on its way to India to find Sri Sumbhajee and his vial of shadow gold. And also from the very end of the last book, we saw that Benedict Huntington's wife, Barbara, has stowed away on the Black Pearl, and we will see soon how she plans to communicate her information to her husband, who is hot on the Pearl's trail. So without further ado, let's dive into Book 3, The Turning Tide. So the book begins with a prologue, and we see that we are aboard the HMS Peacock, which happens to be Benedict Huntington's ship. Interesting note about the name of the ship, as I think it is a reference to his wife Barbara, since we saw her wearing peacock feathers in the last book. So who knows, maybe he named it in honor of her. But given that Benedict is incredibly pale and hates the sun, he is standing on the prow wearing a white cloak and a wide-brimmed hat. Currently, Benedict is trying to find the hiding place of Sri Sumbhajee, since he knows that it is where the Black Pearl is headed. But we find out here that Sri Sumbhajee's stronghold is unknown to pretty much everyone, as no one has ever been able to find where it is. But Benedict is talking to an agent on deck, angered that no one has been able to find where the pirate lord is, and Benedict literally just tosses this EITC agent off the ship without a second thought. But then he feels a warmth in his chest, and no, it is not his heart growing 3 sizes, it is actually a small silver mirror. So he opens it up and he sees his wife in the mirror. So yes, this enchanted mirror is one of 2, and the other one is owned, of course, by Barbara, and they are able to show the other through the mirror. So it is essentially magical 18th century FaceTime. But we see here that Benedict has no idea that his wife is on the Pearl, as he thought she was back in Hong Kong. But Barbara reveals to Benedict that she is on the Black Pearl, and after this, we go over to Chapter 1. So we see Jack and Barbossa in the captain's cabin looking at charts of the Indian Ocean. Carolina is also inside the cabin, and she asks where Sri Sumbhajee lives, to which Barbossa points to Bombay on the map, since the ships going in and out of the port of Bombay have been Sri Sumbhajee's prime targets. Apparently, he has a base on each one of the nearby islands, but no one knows where his personal stronghold is. Jack says that part is easy, given that they'll just let Sumbhajee find them and take them to his stronghold. Barbossa proposes they find his base and go in guns blazing, but Jack shrugs off this plan, which of course annoys Barbossa. We then see Catastrophe Shane come in, asking to bring up a barrel of salted pork from the hold. Jack approves, but we see Marcella rush out of the cabin saying she will get it. This of course is because Barbara is down in the hold, and so far only Marcella knows about her being down there. We then see John on the deck, who is wondering what Marcella is up to, and she takes him below down to the hold. She tells him to wait as she walks into the dark corner where Barbara is hiding, and John hears muffled laughter from back there. Once she returns, John asks who it is, and Marcella simply tells him it is a friend who needed a ride to India. John gets nervous, asking what if Jack finds out, and he proposes that she just tell him about her friend. But Marcella refuses and says to John, "You say one word of this to Jack Sparrow, and I'll march right into his cabin and tell him the secret you are keeping from him." And what is this secret John is keeping from Jack? Well, that is something I will let you speculate on. But John agrees with Marcella and goes to get the barrel of salted pork, refusing to say anything to Jack. We then go over to Diego, who is once again swooning over Carolina, and she tells him he can come down from the crow's nest since Marcella is apparently napping. We then find out here that Marcella sleeps more than anyone else on board, which is another hint that I will leave here for you all to speculate with. Jean is on the forecastle and spots a ship approaching, and Jack says that it is the Otter, which is Sri Sumbhajee's personal ship. This, of course, is going according to Jack's plan of letting Sri Sumbhajee find them, then leading them to his stronghold. Jack then mentions that he hopes Sumbhajee forgot about the incident, and he runs off to his cabin to find something. Jean waves the white flag and calls for parley, and they see Sri Sumbhajee himself on the deck of the Otter. So let's go into the book here. Sri Sumbhajee would like to know what the notorious Jack Sparrow is doing in his waters, said the other big man. Sri Sumbhajee sensed he was coming by the tingling in Sri Sumbhajee's beard. When Sri Sumbhajee's beard tingles, he always knows something bad is on its way, the first man added ominously. Diego glanced at the pirate lord, who had his arms folded and was glaring at the Black Pearl. Why doesn't he speak for himself? He whispered to Carolina. Oh, he never speaks, she whispered back. He always has his aides do all his talking. Nobody knows why. I read about that. Jean pressed his hands together in front of his chest, palms facing each other, and bowed slightly to Sri Sumbhajee. Thank you for allowing us safe passage, he said. Sri Sumbhajee has not granted you safe passage, rumbled one of the big men. Sri Sumbhajee has not forgotten the last time he was honored with a visit from Jack Sparrow, growled the other. But we're here on important business, Carolina interjected. We're going around the world warning the pirate lords of the Brethren Court about the Shadow Lord. The funny part, Diego reflected, was that at this point Carolina had worried about the Shadow Lord so much, she probably believed that was their real mission. Most likely she had forgotten all about the Shadow Gold. The aides glanced down at Sri Sumbhajee, who made a small gesture with his left hand and nodded. Sri Sumbhajee knows all about the Shadow Lord. Sri Sumbhajee sees all and knows all, said one. Nonetheless, the other added quickly, Sri Sumbhajee will allow you to tell him what you know about this Shadow Lord. Wait! Jack's voice called from the cabin. Here it is! Got it! Coming! He dashed out of the cabin and sprinted up the steps, waving something that glittered red in the sunlight. Diego blinked at him and realized Jack was holding a blood-red ruby the size of a fist. Sri Sumbhajee! Jack called out. Nice to see you again, except in the sense of it actually being pleasant in any way. Were you looking for this? Jack held up the gem so the sun shone through its facets, casting flickering reflections like fire on the boards of the ship. Sri Sumbhajee glared even more. He kicked one of his aides in the shins. Sri Sumbhajee wishes to observe that the item in your hand belongs to him and has been in his family for generations, the man said, wincing. He was most displeased to find it missing after your last visit to our shores. And I assure you, I was most displeased to find it had accidentally fallen into my pocket, Jack said charmingly. One moment, there it was, gleaming from the eye of a statue in the middle of the jungle, then all of a sudden, poof, in my coat. I can't imagine how that happened. I absolutely had to turn around at once and bring it back. The men on the deck of the Otter narrowed their eyes at him. It seems to have taken you a few years, observed one of the aides. Well, you know how it is, Jack said, waving one hand in the air. Big world, busy pirate things to do, lots of, waves in the way. Jack, tell them about the Shadow Lord, Carolina prompted him. Yes, Jack said. All in good time. Perhaps we could go back to your palace and discuss it, he said to Sri Sumbhajee with a winning smile. Very big danger, you know. Worldwide threat and all that. Well, I'm sure you know. Your, beard has probably been muttering about it for a while now, eh? Sri Sumbhajee's mustache twitched. He grabbed his aides' robes and forced them to lean down so he could mutter in their ears. So he can speak, Diego whispered to Carolina. He just chooses not to. The aides stood up and beamed at the crew of the Pearl with wide, insincere smiles. Sri Sumbhajee welcomes you to India, the first one said with a little bow. He invites you to stay in his palace while you are here. If you will follow our ship, we will lead you back to Savarnadurg, said the other. And there you may return the property of Sri Sumbhajee to him. Splendid, Jack said. Right, we'll follow you. Sri Sumbhajee will be watching, one of the aides said darkly. Well, I expect so, Jack said. Do you mean with his eyes or with his beard? None of the three men responded to this. Instead, their sailors ran to lift the anchor, and Jack commanded his to do the same. Are you sure this is a good idea, Jack? Diego said. What if it's a trap? Oh, it's definitely a trap, Jack said expansively. But it's a trap with shadow gold in it, isn't it? Don't worry, lad. Escaping from traps is my specialty. That or getting thrown out of them because someone realizes they don't want to keep me around after all. He sauntered off to check the jib, tossing and catching the ruby in one hand. Diego knew that what Jack was saying was probably true. All the same, as they followed the otter between the high green shores of the islands, Diego had an uneasy, sinking feeling. Once they were inside Sri Sumbhajee's fortress, would they ever get out again? So the Pearl is led to the island of Savarnadurg, which, if you research this, it is actually a real island off the coast of India, and it looks exactly how it is described in this book. The island itself has very steep cliffs that are essentially completely straight and very steep, and there are trees and greenery along the shore and up the sides of the steep rock faces. The walls of the fortress are actually chiseled into these steep rock walls. Definitely look it up, as the pictures of this island, like the real place, are very, very cool. But we see that there are rocks lining the shore of the island, and along with the straight, steep rock faces, the fortress is essentially impregnable. But we then see the pirates with long ropes pulling the rocks away from the shore. They are only an illusion to ward off threats, and a curtain of moss is pulled up, revealing a passageway through the rock leading inside the island. The otter and the Pearl sail inside, and the moss is lowered and the rocks are put back into place. Then, once they are inside, they see Sri Sumbhajee's palace, made out of red sandstone and white marble. It is a lavish and incredible palace, and everyone disembarks, besides Alex, who stays on the Pearl. But Sri Sumbhajee comes up to Jack, demanding that he return the ruby he stole. We see his two attendants are named Askay and Pusan, and these are the two guys who are with Sri Sumbhajee in At World's End, with Askay being the one who is shot by Edward Teague. But Jack gives back the ruby, and then the crew of the Pearl follows the pirate lord into his palace. As they enter, Carolina and Marcella are taken to the women's quarters, and everyone else goes to the men's quarters, since that is their custom. Diego and Carolina are sad to be separated, but Carolina blows him a kiss before she disappears down the hallway. But as Sri Sumbhajee leads the rest of the Pearl's crew through the palace, we see Sri Sumbhajee outraged at something. So let's find out what's going on. Sri Sumbhajee whipped around, the points of his mustache trembling violently. He flapped his hands at Askay and Pusan and stormed into the courtyard, nearly at a run. Curious, Jack hurried after him. Something had clearly set off Sri Sumbhajee's temper, and Jack enjoyed seeing another pirate lord mad. Sri Sumbhajee pulled a long knife out of his waist sash as he stormed across the stone paths, kicking a peacock out of his way. He was heading for the enclosure with the columns, where, Jack now saw, there was a throne set up high in an alcove above the back wall. The throne was made of gleaming black wood with gold covering nearly every inch of it. Gold lion heads glared from the top of the throne, gold claws jutted from the arms, and gold lion paws formed the base of each leg. Red velvet pillows embroidered with gold were piled high on the throne, and a fur-lined robe was thrown across the back. Lounging across this throne was a sleepy-looking middle-aged man with a bit of a paunch. His beard was not as long as Sri Sumbhajee's, and his eyes were nowhere near as fierce. Plus, he was significantly taller than the pirate lord. But Jack was sure he could see a strong family resemblance nonetheless. Sri Sumbhajee snapped his fingers at his aides, gesticulating impatiently. "Manajee!" Askay bellowed as they reached the first line of columns. "How dare you!" Pusan joined in. "Sri Sumbhajee is consumed with rage." The man on the throne jolted awake and rubbed his eyes blearily. He blinked down at the pirate lord, who was waving his fist at him again. "Oh, hey," he said slowly. "I mean, all hail. How does it go again? Hail the great and wondrous Sri Sumbhajee, pirate lord of the Indian Ocean, terror of the Arabian Sea," Askay roared. "Yeah," Manajee said, yawning. "That." Jack was amused to see Sri Sumbhajee's face turn deep red. It looked almost as if smoke were about to come pouring out of his ears. The Indian pirate lord seized Pusan's wrist, and Pusan let out a small yelp of pain. "Get out of his chair!" Pusan bellowed. "Remove your unworthy carcass from the revered lion throne of the pirate lord," Askay elaborated. Manajee twisted around and seemed to notice where he was. "Oh, sorry, Sum Sum. It just looked so comfortable." "Sum Sum?" Jack echoed with glee. The pirate lord fumed while Manajee slowly hefted himself out of the chair. Looking abashed but not terribly upset, Manajee fluffed the pillows and straightened the fur robe. Sri Sumbhajee wishes to remind his fool of a brother that he is allowed to live by the mercy of the great pirate lord, and that he should be more mindful of the respect he owes him. Askay growled a bit more softly as Manajee climbed down from the alcove. "No harm done," Manajee said, a resentful tone creeping into his voice. "I was just taking a nap. There's no need to get all high and mighty about it." Sri Sumbhajee is keeping an eye on you, Pusan said. Yeah, Manaji muttered, as always. Aren't you going to introduce us? Jack interjected, stepping forward with a grin. I had no idea you had a brother, Sri Sumbhajee. Sri Sumbhajee once had many brothers, Askay said, but not all of them knew how to show proper respect. Now there are only 2, Pusan added ominously. Manaji rolled his eyes, but Jack was the only one who noticed. Bonjour, John called from the corridor, where the rest of the pirates were waiting. Sri Sumbhajee, sir? I was just wondering whether we might be getting to eat soon. Sri Sumbhajee's angry look vanished, and a sly smile spread across his face. He poked Pusan's elbow and whispered in his ear. But of course, Pusan said, straightening up. Sri Sumbhajee will have the kitchens prepare a great feast for tonight. We will share with you the very best of Indian hospitality. He and Askay pressed their hands together and bowed. The pirates were taken to a corridor lined with empty rooms. Each room contained a few rugs and blankets for sleeping on, but little else. Jack noted with disappointment that there didn't seem to be anything worth borrowing in this room. Even the rugs had been nailed to the floor. Well, how do you like that? Jack said, looking injured. No trust, after I gave them back that ruby and everything. Shocking, John said mirthfully, shaking his head. They were sharing the room, with Billy and Barbosa next door and Diego and Shane on the other side. Jack Sparrow, Askay said from the door, his massive bulk nearly filling the entire doorway. Captain Jack Sparrow, Jack said absently. He was peering through his window at the flower-filled courtyard outside, wondering if he could catch a glimpse of the women's quarters from here. Sri Sumbhajee knows you are a pirate with many enemies, Askay went on smoothly. For your safety during your stay with us, he has selected a warrior of the highest skill to accompany you. Everywhere. Askay layered its last word with meaningful intensity. I see, Jack said. Well, that is very kind of Sri Sumbhajee. Please convey my gratitude, but assure him that I am more than capable of defending myself, as I have done on many a swashbuckling occasion, as he himself might remember. Sri Sumbhajee insists, Askay said in a voice that could not be argued with. He turned and motioned to someone in the corridor. A small masked figure appeared in the doorway, and Askay stood aside to let the warrior squeeze into the room. Jack raised one eyebrow. The warrior was tiny, no taller than Carolina. His loose pants and belted tunic were the bright orange of marigolds. A black scarf was tied around his head, hiding everything except his eyes. Jack couldn't even see a weapon on him. The warrior clasped his hands behind his back and stood at attention next to the door, staring at Jack. Perfect, Askay said, beaming. I feel that you are much safer already. He ducked out of the door. Wait, John called. What's his name? You have no need to speak to each other, Askay responded, and therefore no need for names. His footsteps receded down the hall. Jack and John blinked at the silent warrior. His eyes were dark and revealed nothing about what was going on behind the mask. So, who might you be, then? Jack asked. There was no reply. Come, Jack said. If you're going to be trailing around perniciously spying on me, I think we should at least be able to chat about it. The warrior didn't move. All right, let me guess, Jack said. Is your name Harold? He checked. No reaction. Albert? Gustav? Umberto? Fitz? This could go on for a while, John observed. He laid down on his pile of rugs and clutched his stomach. I wonder how soon the feast will be. How soon is the feast? Jack asked the warrior. You better tell him. He gets a tad violent when he's hungry. The dark eyes did not move away from Jack for a moment. Well, this is pleasant, Jack remarked. I can see we're going to be great chums. He paused, scanning the room casually, and then suddenly drew his sword and lunged at the small figure. But by the time he reached the wall, the warrior was gone. Jack whirled around in surprise and found his sword lifted right out of his hand. There was a strange whirring sound, a flash of moving steel, and a clatter as his sword landed in the far corner of the room, inches away from John's hand. Hey, John protested without sitting up. Do you mind? I like my head the way it is, thank you. The warrior stood before Jack, half crouched as if ready to leap again. In his hand was a kind of weapon Jack had never seen before. It had the hilt of a sword, which fitted neatly into its opponent's palm, but blooming from the hilt were 2 long, gleaming steel ropes. Now they lay coiled at the warrior's feet, but in an instant they could flick out like whips and do serious damage. Jack could see the sharp edges of the blades from where he stood. It was a bit of a miracle Jack hadn't been sliced open with his swords plucked away from him. This warrior had quite a lot of skill. Where were you hiding that? Jack marveled. What a remarkable toy. Mind if I take a look? He edged closer, trying to seem casual. The warrior began to raise the weapon, as if warning Jack to stay back, but Jack abruptly dove at him, wrapping his arms around the warrior's waist and knocking him off balance. The warrior struggled to raise his weapon as they fell onto the stone floor. But as Jack had noticed, it was a weapon best used at a distance. Up this close, the warrior was just as likely to hurt himself while trying to cut Jack. Of course, this kind of combat wasn't exactly Jack's forte either. The strange weapon clattered to the floor, sending a ripple along the long, flexible blades. Jack felt the warrior's knee drive into his chest as he staggered back with a oof. The warrior spun around to kick Jack in the head, but Jack grabbed his foot before it connected and threw the warrior backward onto John's bed. "Ah!" John yelped, trying to roll out of the way. For a moment, John and the warrior were tangled together, rugs and limbs waving madly. Finally, John struggled free and the warrior leaped to his feet, panting angrily. John glanced down at his hand and realized he had seized the warrior's hood by accident while they were entangled. He looked up at the warrior and gasped. It wasn't a strangely tiny man at all. The warrior set to guard them was, in fact, the most beautiful woman John had ever seen. So in that reading, we saw Sri Sumbhajee's last surviving brother, Manaji, and this warrior ordered to watch Jack is not a man, as they first believed, but a woman. But we then go over to the women's quarters where Marcella and Carolina are being dressed for the feast. Let's dive back into the book. "No," Carolina protested. "I'm perfectly happy with what I'm wearing. I'm not changing." "Can mine be pink?" Marcella asked. "I want a pink one." The woman in lavender, who had introduced herself as Parvati, closed her eyes and sighed heavily. "It is only for a short while," she said to Carolina. "We must present you well at the banquet tonight. Please, I am asking you nicely." "Yeah, Carolina," Marcella snipped. "Why do you have to be so rude all the time? And how come you don't ever want to be pretty? I mean, I know it would be extra hard for you, but you could at least try." Carolina noticed a young boy watching them from the top of a wall a few feet away. He looked about 7 years old, with tousled black hair and bare brown feet. His small face was cunning and curious. "There's a boy in here," Marcella said to Parvati, pointing. "But of course," the Indian woman said. "We raise all the children in the women's quarters, boys and girls, until the boys are old enough to cross over to the men's side. That is Tulaji, Sri Sumbhajee's brother." "Brother?" Carolina said in surprise. "But he's so young." "Half-brother," Parvati amended. "Sri Sumbhajee's father died just before Tulaji was born. He was quite old. Believe me, we were all surprised too." "Does Sri Sumbhajee have any children?" Carolina asked. "Not yet," Parvati said. "His brother Manaji is his heir at the moment. You see, our great and wondrous Sri Sumbhajee devoted much of his life to learning the serene and simple ways of the priesthood." "Until he became a pirate," said Carolina. "Well, yes," Parvati said. "That's what his father always wanted for him." She beckoned to a young girl who was hovering nearby. "Veena, take Marcella and help her into her sari." I think I know how to put on a pretty dress," Marcella said. Parvati and Veena both hid smiles. "This is a little more complicated than a dress," Veena said politely. She took Marcella's hand and led her behind a screen. Carolina could still hear her complaining. "I hate this color. Why can't I have pink? Ooh, do I get jewelry too?" The Spanish princess felt guilty. Parvati did seem nice, and Carolina didn't want her to think that Carolina was as horrible as Marcella. But on the other hand, Carolina had spent her whole life being told what to wear and how to behave and what to do every moment of the day. Whole point of being a pirate was freedom, wasn't it? "What are you doing?" Marcella cried. "What is that? Where are the armholes? Where is the bodice? I want a corset. It's just a big piece of cloth. You want to wrap it where?" Parvati gave Carolina a wry look. "If it helps," she said, "we could wrap your sari in such a way to give you as much freedom as movement as possible. Our warrior women even wear these in battle sometimes." "Really?" Carolina said, interested now despite herself. "You have warrior women?" "Of course," Parvati said, producing a shimmering length of red silk. "Don't you want to see how it's done?" Her smile said she knew that Carolina was now too curious to say no. Not too far away, one of these same warrior women was glaring at John. Her dark hair had tumbled to her shoulders and her large eyes were flashing dangerously. John guessed that she was a couple of years younger than he was. More of a warrior girl, really. "By all the gods!" she cried, stamping her foot. "You persistent, nosy pirates! Why couldn't you just leave me alone to do my job?" She snatched the black scarf out of John's hands. "Wait," John said. "Don't put it back on. Please. We're sorry." "I'm not," Jack said, leading toward her seductively. "Hello, love. Captain Jack Sparrow. Maybe you've heard of me." "No," she said. "I don't care who you are. I have my orders, and they include not talking to you." She lifted the scarf to her face, but John leaped forward and grabbed it away again. "Tell us your name first," he said. "Yes," Jack said. "I can see I was rather on the wrong track before. You're not much of a Fitzy," he mused for a moment. "Brunhilde?" "I'm John Maglior," John said. "We won't interfere with your job. I just want to know who you are." The girl kicked John's legs out from under him and seized the scarf as he fell over. "All right, fair enough," John said from the floor. "Pushy chap, isn't she?" Jack said to the warrior girl. He hasn't had much success with the ladies in his short life. Not like me. Popular with the ladies is my middle name. He paused. Well, that and danger. And freedom. And possibly Robert. Depends on who you ask, really. She stomped back over to the door and shook out her scarf, ignoring him. I have a tremendous intuitive sense of the female creature, Jack carried on, waving one hand in the air. For instance, at this moment I intuit you are falling madly in love with me, despite yourself. The girl looked down at John. Does he always talk this much? I'm afraid so, John said. It is one of my most charming qualities, Jack observed, beaming. He might shut up a little if you told us your name, John offered bravely. The warrior girl pulled her hair back and wound it on top of her head. As she began to drape the scarf, her eyes met John's, and her face seemed to soften a little. Fine, she said. It's Lakshmi. My name is Lakshmi. A small smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. And I am to take you to the feast as soon as you are refreshed. John bounded to his feet. I'm refreshed. I'm ready. Diego poked his head in. Behind him stood Poussin. We're being summoned, he said. Oh, hello. He spotted Lakshmi as she knelt to pick up the odd weapon. What is that? He asked curiously. It's an Arumi, Lakshmi said. It takes a lot of training to use, but it's very deadly. She shot Jack a warning look. No arguments here, darling, Jack said with a flirtatious grin. They all watched in surprise as she coiled the long, flexible swords around her waist like a belt. No wonder I didn't spot it, Jack thought. Wow, Diego said, shaking his head. Carolina's going to love you. From the moony look on John's face, Carolina wasn't the only one, Jack thought. So we find out this warrior's name is Lakshmi, and as the book states, she is the most beautiful woman John has ever laid eyes upon. He is swooning over her, but then they are summoned and all make their way to the feast. Once they make it into the court area, Diego looks for Carolina and he sees her wearing a ruby-colored sari with gold earrings and a red flower tucked into her hair. She tells Diego she's embarrassed enough as it is, but Diego is overcome in his feelings and tells her she looks beautiful. But then Marcella shows up in a yellow and green sari with mountains of gaudy jewelry on, and she asks Diego if she looks beautiful. John is then distracted by the smell of the food, which is on its way, but we see a man bring a platter of food to Sri Sumbhajee, and we see this man is very nervous. John asks Lakshmi why they haven't served anyone else, and she tells him that Sri Sumbhajee is always served first. Sumbhajee's aides ask who has been near the food, and the man tells them that he prepared it himself. Poussin tells the man to sample the food, and the man nervously dips a piece of bread into one of the sauces. Carolina tells Diego that the man is a food taster, and they are used to make sure no one's trying to poison the person in charge. So let's see what happens here. Silence fell over the courtyard as the man chewed slowly and swallowed. After a moment, a smile spread across his face. You see, he said, lifting his hands towards Sri Sumbhajee. As I said, perfectly His face turned purple and his eyes rolled back. Clutching his neck, he toppled over sideways. Uh-oh, Jack said. Not good. Sri Sumbhajee leaped to his feet. Sri Sumbhajee knew it, Aske bellowed, drawing his sword. Sri Sumbhajee knows all, Poussin roared. Someone is trying to poison him. Well, it wasn't me, Jack said immediately. He leaned over to Barbossa. We didn't do it, did we? He mumbled out of the corner of his mouth. Barbossa rolled his eyes. Sri Sumbhajee is aware that this is not the doing of our distinguished guests, Poussin said with a small bow. This is the 4th time now that his food taster has keeled over dead, so unless your assassins invisibly preceded you, someone here at court is the culprit. Sri Sumbhajee is most displeased, Aske announced. Sri Sumbhajee does not like to be nearly poisoned. The feast is hereby cancelled, said Poussin. What? Jean cried. Why? What about us? I don't mind a little poison. Wait, don't go. With a look of abject despair, he watched the silver platters being marched away. Lakshmi patted his hand sympathetically as his stomach growled again. Whoever is trying to kill Sri Sumbhajee will be punished most severely, Aske said, glaring around the seated courtiers. Sri Sumbhajee banged his fist into the palm of his hand. He will be trampled by elephants, Poussin declared, and then fed to crocodiles. Yuck, Marcella said, wrinkling her nose. Are you sure we can't eat the food? John said plaintively. Any of the food? Of course, you have to catch the scoundrel first, Jack said to Sri Sumbhajee, lifting his spoon and twisting it to see his reflection. It gleamed as if it were made of gold. You know, before the delightful spectacle of elephant trampling and crocodile feeding. But I'm sure you have the situation well in hand. Sri Sumbhajee and his aides shifted their glares to him. No? Jack said, noticing their expressions. He breathed on the spoon and rubbed it on his sleeve. Your beard hasn't given you any hints? I thought the great Sri Sumbhajee and his wondrous beard knew all. Sri Sumbhajee will use his powers to identify the assassin, Aske said. And then, elephants and crocodiles, Poussin cried. They probably didn't poison everyone's dishes, John pointed out desperately. I have an idea, Carolina said suddenly. Sri Sumbhajee, if we catch the assassin for you, may we ask you a favor? And what is that? Aske said, his eyes narrowing. A favor to be named later, Jack interjected quickly. He knew how Carolina thought. He'd seen her in negotiations with Mistress Cheng veer sharply away from Shadow Gold into the wishy-washy fight alongside us territory, as if defeating a worldwide nemesis were more important than saving Jack's life. Sri Sumbhajee does not need help, Poussin said. Sri Sumbhajee knows all, yes, yes, Jack said, waving one hand in a circle. Diego noticed that his spoon appeared to have vanished. Well, vanished if he pretended not to notice the spoon-shaped lump in Jack's sleeve. The court may disperse, Aske announced. Sri Sumbhajee is going to bed, Poussin added. Jack glanced up at the sky, which was still fairly light. The sun was a ball of orange on the horizon. Wait, Carolina said. Shouldn't we talk about the Shadow Lord? Shouldn't we eat something? John protested. Sri Sumbhajee will speak with you in the morning, Poussin said firmly. The pirate lord gathered his robes around him and strode regally away. As soon as he was gone, the members of his court started climbing to their feet, muttering and grumbling. John flopped over onto his back, groaning piteously. Catastrophe Shane tried to stand up, but he got his boots tangled in the cushions and ended up sprawled across the flagstones. Courtiers and pirates politely stepped over him. In the commotion, Jack beckoned Diego, Carolina, and Barbossa. Marcella crowded up behind Diego, craning to listen in. So what's the plan? Barbossa asked, leading into the huddle. Plan? Jack said. I was just saying hello. How are the women's quarters, Carolina? Notice any secret ways to get in there? They're nice, Carolina said, giving him an amused look. Jack spotted Manajee whispering to a woman in a sari the color of the sea. She had a round, pretty face and looked about as doughy as Manajee. Her plump hands smoothed his hair and straightened his kirtle while they talked. Carolina, love, Jack said, nodding with his head. Have you made the acquaintance of that young woman? Sure, Carolina said. That's Jumpa, Manajee's wife. Parvati had escorted the girls around the women's quarters and introduced them to a few high-ranking court women. What had surprised Carolina the most was discovering that Parvati was in fact Sri Sumbhajee's current wife. His last one had died a few years earlier. Keep an eye on her, would you? Jack said with a wink. She has a suspicious air about her. Reminds me of a charming blonde I met once on Tortuga. He touched his cheek and winced, remembering. Very strong opinions. We're going to solve this, Carolina said, giving Diego an excited look. If we save Sri Sumbhajee's life, then he'll definitely help us fight the Shadow Lord, won't he? You may not have noticed this, Jack said, but he is a pirate. Carolina ignored him. See what you can find out, she said to Diego, especially about Manajee. He is Sri Sumbhajee's heir, so he'd be the next pirate lord if Sri Sumbhajee died, which gives him a real motive. I'm glad I don't have someone hanging around plotting my death all the time, eh, Barbossa? Jack asked. Jack's first mate made a strange, contorted face. We're wasting time, he growled. We should draw our swords, demand the vial, and make our escape. A solid plan, Jack said. Oh, except for the bit at the end where we get fed to crocodiles. I have to go, Carolina said, spotting Parvati moving toward her. She whispered in Diego's ear and nodded. What? Marcella demanded. What did you say? Secrets are rude. Come along, girls, Parvati said, taking their elbows and steering them back to the women's quarters. Carolina gave Diego a meaningful look as she was led away. So after the little huddle there, Diego says they should talk to Manajee, who is in the courtyard trying to pick some mangoes off a mango tree. Diego offers to help him and asks who he thinks is trying to kill his brother. Manajee says that everyone is because he is a pirate lord, and that he is glad his brother is the target and not him. Diego asks if Manajee would want to be pirate lord, and Manajee tells him he would not want to be. Diego can't tell if Manajee is lying or telling the truth, but he is one suspect in this mystery. We then go over to the women's quarters, where Carolina has fallen in love with mangoes. But she and Marcella are with Manajee's wife Jumpa and Sumbhajee's wife Parvati. But a monkey jumps onto Marcella and she starts freaking out. It takes some of the jewelry and then scurries off into the tree, and we see this monkey prank was instigated by Tulaji, who is Sumbhajee's very young half-brother. He is the son of Sri Sumbhajee's father, and Nisha, who never leaves her room and only sees Tulaji. Even the women who bring her food must be covered from head to toe. We see that Tulaji wants to be a pirate lord, and he returns the stolen jewels at Parvati's request. Also, we see that Jumpa is pregnant with her and Manajee's son, and they want their son to be Pirate Lord someday. Parvati says that Manajee's son will only inherit the title if Sri Sumbhajee does not have any children of his own. So Carolina takes all this information and wonders if Jhumpa and Manajee could be behind the plot to kill Sri Sumbhajee. We then go back over to Jack and John of course is starving given that he didn't get to eat. He wonders where Lakshmi went, and Jack decides to go out exploring, and John would like to go with him, but he is too hungry. But he begins to smell food, and as he sits up, he sees Lakshmi on a cushion arranging bowls of vegetables and rice. John asks her where she got all the food, and Lakshmi tells him that the head cook is her cousin, so she can get in whenever she wants. She also tells him the vegetables are not poisoned because apparently Sri Sumbhajee does not eat his vegetables. Well, let's go back into the book. John ate the mouthful of bread and closed his eyes with a blissful smile. "Wow," he said. "Will you marry me?" "All right," she said, "but I have to work off my debt to Sri Sumbhajee first." John blinked at her and she started laughing. "That'll teach you to be careful what you say, won't it?" she teased. "I would absolutely marry you," he said fervently. "What debt are you talking about? When will it be repaid?" Lakshmi went quiet, looking down at the bowls and the flagstones between them. "It's not important." "It is to me," John insisted. "Please tell me." "Well," she tucked a strand of her raven hair behind her ear, "a few years ago, Sri Sumbhajee captured my father's trading ship with my whole family on board. He was going to slaughter us all, but I guess he was impressed by my fighting skills. I've been training with the Urumi since I was very young. He said if I would join his crew and fight alongside him for either 10 years or 2 big battles, he would spare my parents." Her dark eyes glanced up at John, then dropped again. "Of course," I agreed. "I thought a pirate like Sri Sumbhajee would face a major battle almost every day. But it's been 3 years, and he's managed to keep me away from anything that serious. I think he just likes having a warrior girl to show off," she added bitterly. "I'm sorry," John said. A thought struck him. "You know, a major battle is coming, perhaps the biggest any pirate, any person has ever faced. He won't be able to keep you out of that. He'll need you beside him." Lakshmi looked at him, her eyes skeptical, with a glimmer of hope and curiosity. "What are you talking about?" "The Shadow Lord," John said. Then he told her everything he knew, which wasn't very much. "You haven't seen a vial of shadow gold, have you?" he asked at the end. She shook her head, confused. "Not that I know of, but if it's really important, Sri Sumbhajee probably carries it on him at all times." "What does it do?" "Not sure," John said, "but Jack says we need it, so, well, not that that means it's true. In fact, knowing him as long as I have, I can guarantee you that it only means he's probably not telling us something. But I like sailing with him, at least for now." He shrugged. Speaking of Jack, shouldn't you be following him around? I wouldn't want anyone to get angry at you." She shrugged dismissively. "I don't really care what Sparrow takes from Sri Sumbhajee. I agreed to fight alongside the Pirate Lord. I never agreed to guard his belongings. Jack Sparrow is his problem, not mine." So yes, John has completely fallen in love with Lakshmi, and she has as well. But we then go over to Jack, who is sneaking around the palace. He accidentally runs into a group of guards, and they begin to chase him away as Jack runs. As he hides in the gardens, he feels the shadows begin to return, so he needs to find the next vial as soon as possible. We then go over to Diego and Catastrophe Shane's room, and Diego sneaks out of his room. He quickly looks in Jack and John's room and sees John and Lakshmi sleeping together, which is very cute, but he goes out into the courtyard and meets up with Carolina. Together they go down to the gardens so they aren't spotted, but let's go back into the book. "What kind of stone is that?" Diego asked, touching the jewel in her necklace lightly. It was cool and smooth under his finger, like a pearl but more translucent. "It's a moonstone," Carolina whispered. "Parvati gave it to me. She said it would protect me, but I don't know from what. I think this food poisoning business is really worrying her. She said if we do find the assassin and save Sri Sumbhajee, she'll let me keep it." "So you don't think she could be the assassin?" Diego said. "Does she have any reason to want Sri Sumbhajee dead?" Carolina shook her head. "Not that I know of. I mean, I don't get the impression that she loves him exactly, but I think she would rather be the wife of the Pirate Lord than his widow, that's for sure." She tugged him off the path and led him between a pair of tall hibiscus bushes. Hidden from view of the palace by a screen of foliage, they sat down on the grass, under a large tree with clusters of star-shaped white flowers. A nightingale was singing softly on a branch above them. "You could be right that it's Manajee," Diego said. "He does have a motive, but I kind of get the feeling he likes sleeping more than, looting and pillaging. He was having trouble concentrating on this conversation, with Carolina only inches away and her soft hair brushing his arm. All he could really think about was her. "What?" he said, realizing that she'd spoken and he missed it. She gave him a funny look. "What if it's Managee's wife instead? Jhumpa is pregnant with her first child. Now would be a great time to get Sri Sumbhajee out of the way, so there's no question Managee's child will inherit the title of Pirate Lord." Diego nodded. "Does she seem like a poisoner?" "Well," Carolina said, "I don't know. What's a poisoner like?" "I only know about pirates and princes, and I much prefer the former, by the way." "You know about stable boys, too," Diego said boldly. He could clearly see her smile in the moonlight. "Well, I know about one of them, and he's better than all the pirates and princes combined." Diego's heart leaped. What should he say? Was this the right moment to tell her how he felt? He opened his mouth, but she was already talking about the assassination attempts again. "We need to figure out who has access to the kitchens," Carolina mused. "I asked Parvati, and she says they are off limits to everyone but the cooks. It's a small space. Someone would definitely notice if, say, Jhumpa wandered through and dumped a vial of poison in the curry." "Curry?" Diego echoed. "Parvati was telling me about what they normally eat. If we solve this mystery, we might actually get to have some before we leave," Carolina said. "Well," Diego said reluctantly, "then there might be one more person to add to our list." "Oh, there are countless suspects," Carolina said, "like Askai and Poussin. Do they get tired of being mouthpieces but having no power? And, I'm sorry, you go ahead." Diego looked down, turning her hand over in both of his. "You know the warrior who's been assigned to keep an eye on Jack?" Carolina nodded. "It's a girl named Lakshmi. You should talk to each other. She has this unusual weapon I can't even begin to describe. Well, unless she's the murderer, then maybe you shouldn't talk to each other." "Why would you think she is the one we're looking for?" Carolina asked, surprised. "I overheard her talking to John earlier," he said. "I heard her say that her cousin is the head cook, so she can get in the kitchens whenever she wants." "Huh," Carolina said. She tapped her chin with the fingers of her free hand, looking thoughtful. "But why?" Diego shrugged. "Maybe to get free of Sri Sumbhajee," he said. "Otherwise, she said she could be forced to work for him for the next 7 years. "Yeah, that would do it," Carolina said wryly. "Can you imagine—" "What was that?" They both sat up, listening. A twig snapped somewhere nearby. The nightingale fell silent. Was there someone or something watching them from the shadows? Diego pulled Carolina to her feet and they tiptoed over to the bushes. "We better get back to the palace," he whispered. "All right," Carolina whispered back. They waited for a moment until clouds drifted across the face of the moon and the gardens were plunged in the darkness. Then they slipped out onto the open grass and started padding quickly back to the stairs. Suddenly, without warning, Carolina stood on tiptoe, took Diego's face in her hands, and kissed him. All right, very sweet moment between Diego and Carolina there, and they have finally kissed. But they are interrupted by an elephant that stampedes through the area. So the two of them run into a nearby tower, and they stop in front of a massive statue of an Indian god that they don't recognize. But they do not have a chance to rest as they hear a woman's voice from outside. So the two of them hide behind the statue as the woman comes in. And this woman is none other than Barbara Huntington. So let's go back into the book once again. The stranger set the lantern down on the altar. "That's better," she said. "Can you hear me now?" "Yes," said a second voice. Carolina and Diego glanced at each other. Who was she talking to? Only one shadow moved on the wall. She seemed to be alone. "Good," she said. "Now, have you been taking notes? You remember all about the fake rocks?" "Yes, yes," said the other voice. It sounded male and impatient. "You mentioned a curtain of moss covering the entrance on the outer wall. Can you get to it and lift it for us?" The woman inhaled sharply. "But that would be dangerous. You wouldn't let me to be in any danger, would you, Benny?" "Benny?" Carolina mouthed to Diego. "Everything you're doing is dangerous," Benny's voice growled. "It would be helpful, that's all." "I think I've been quite helpful enough," the woman snapped. "You know this is the closest the company has ever come to catching Sri Sumbhajee. I can't do everything for you, Benedict. Would you like me to storm the palace too? Sail our ships into the harbor? Hold the pirate lords at gunpoint? Take them back to England with me? Tell you what, you don't even need to show up at all. I'll just defeat the pirate lord of the Indian Ocean by myself, shall I?" Carolina's fingers were digging into Diego's arm. She was talking to Benedict Huntington. They thought the pearl had escaped him in Hong Kong. How had he followed them here? Barbara, I'm sorry," Benedict said, trying to stem the tide of angry words. "You've been amazing." "I know," she said snippetly, "and I think I deserve a little appreciation, that's all." I do appreciate it, he said. The entire East India Trading Company will thank you for it. Why, you'll probably get a medal. I'd rather have some new perfume, Barbara sniffed. I'll buy you all the perfumes of the Far East, Benedict promised. Don't worry about a thing. Keep yourself safe, and we'll handle the rest of the plan from here. Thank you, darling, Barbara said. Kisses! Kisses to you too, Benedict said. See you soon. There was a small snapping noise, and then the woman picked up the lantern and strode off into the night. Diego and Carolina looked at each other in horror. Somehow the woman had infiltrated Sri Sumbhajee's defenses and revealed his secrets, and now agents of the East India Trading Company were on their way to Svartadurg to capture them all. Well, said a voice from above them, that can't be good. Jack, said Diego, peering up into the shadows. The voice sounded like their captain, but what was he doing here? Diego saw someone moving beside the statue's head. Hello down there, Jack Sparrow said cheerfully. Fine night for a walk, and then a chase, and then a fright and some eavesdropping, isn't it? What are you doing up there? Carolina asked. Getting a little perspective, Jack said. That and waiting for the guards to stop looking for me. I think they have, Diego said. I heard a couple of them on the way out here. Given up already, Jack said, sounding aggrieved. Well, that's not very sporting of them. Carolina wiggled out of the tight space and climbed back onto the statue's knees. Balancing her bare feet lightly on the folds of its robe, she clambered up to its arm and then scooted up to Jack. Nervously, Diego climbed up behind her. It looked like a very long way down from the top. Jack was fiddling with his knife. The statue's face was serene and blank. Something glittered from the center of the statue's forehead. Jack, Carolina cried, are you trying to steal that ruby again? No, no, Jack protested. Much better. I'm waiting for it to fall into my pocket again. Could happen any minute. You never know. I knew it, Carolina cried. You're going to steal back that ruby. Diego realized she was right. The large jewel that formed one of the statue's eyes was the same gem Jack had just returned to Sri Sumbhajee. The Indian pirate lord had already returned the ruby to its original home. Am not, Jack protested. R2! Am not! R2! I just happen to be sitting here, Jack said. I am merely taking a short rest that happens to be in close proximity to the ruby in question. Is that such a crime? No, Carolina said. But, and if that same ruby should happen to fall into my pocket again, would that be such a crime either? Yes, Carolina said. Don't make Sri Sumbhajee mad at us. We need him to believe us the East India Trading Company is coming. We have to get out of here as soon as we can. Absolutely, Jack said. First thing tomorrow morning. No, right now, Carolina said. We have no idea when they'll get here. Jack said, shaking his head. Nobody wakes Sri Sumbhajee once he's asleep. I heard the same thing, Diego admitted. What about for emergencies? Carolina cried. Emergencies, like, say, your arch nemesis finding out all your secrets and coming to kill you possibly within minutes. Wouldn't he want to be woken up for that? Certainly not, Jack said. Even pirates need their rest, love. It's all right, Carolina, Diego said, touching her shoulder. I doubt they'll be here before morning. If there's to be a fight, I'll be more ready for it after a good night's sleep. Fine, Carolina said. She slid down, glancing back at her crewmates. But if we're captured, I'm not going back to Spain or San Agustin. I would rather die. She jumped down, landing amid the marigolds at her feet, and vanished out the door before Diego could get to her. Come on, Jack, Diego said. Back to our quarters. You go on ahead, Jack said, squinting up at the roof and trying to look casual. I'll be along in a minute. No, Jack, Diego said. Leave the ruby alone. I am leaving the ruby alone, Jack said in mock outrage. I'm not touching it, am I? It's not my fault that its setting is a little loose. Jack bumped the statue's head as he spoke and then whirled around with his coat outstretched. The jewel stayed in place. Disappointed, Jack gave the head a few more accidental shoves. It didn't budge, and neither did the ruby. Well, he muttered, it used to be a little loose. Let's go, Jack, Diego said. Captain Jack, the pirate muttered. Captain Jack. Why doesn't anyone ever remember that? So the three of them go back to their respective rooms, and as Jack tries to go to sleep, he is pestered by the shadow creatures again. We see this creature talking to Jack, and he tells him that he was the one who cursed Jack with the shadow illness, and he is confused as to why it hasn't progressed farther. But then the shadow realizes that Jack has drank some of the shadow gold, and the shadow gets very upset with Jack. The shadow tells Jack that he won't get away with this, and that it dissipates, and Jack passes out. The next morning, Carolina talks to Tulaji, who tells Carolina that he wants to go out pirating with Sri Sumbhajee, but he believes he is too young. He also tells her that his mother would do anything to make him pirate lord, which gives Carolina a sneaking suspicion. So she then heads to the kitchens and notices it is guarded by some of Sumbhajee's pirates. So Carolina makes a plan to get inside. She sees a woman exit the kitchens wearing a long blue cloak that covered her whole body besides her eyes, and Carolina deduces that she is bringing food to Nisha, so she hurries after the woman. The woman goes inside a room and then comes back out, and she sees Carolina following her. Carolina just asks if she could borrow the woman's cloak, and the woman happily agrees, saying it weighs as much as an elephant. This woman's name is Sarah, and she agrees to let Carolina borrow the cloak if she gives her the earrings she is wearing. She tells Carolina that she has half an hourglass to snoop around the kitchens before picking up Nisha's food tray once she's done. So Carolina puts it on and heads into the kitchens, hoping to see the poisoner in action. But then we go over to Jack and Diego, who are trying to tell Sri Sumbhajee about the incoming EITC attack. Aske and Pusan say that if it were true, Sri Sumbhajee would know about it, given that he knows all and everything. And besides, they need to figure out who is trying to kill Sri Sumbhajee. But Jack says that he knows who it is, and Pusan demands he explain himself. Jack tells him that they just need to figure out who the stupidest person in the court is, given that they're trying to kill Sri Sumbhajee in the stupidest way possible. They keep poisoning the food over and over again instead of trying a new route to kill him. And Jack does make a very good point here. But then we go back over to Carolina, who is still in the kitchens, and she sees Tulaji's monkey holding a vial over the food. And back in the court, the culprit reveals himself, and it is none other than 7-year-old Tulaji. He confesses his plan because Jack called him stupid, and Carolina then comes running in exclaiming that it's Tulaji, but of course everyone already knows that. But we see Sri Sumbhajee with a proud look on his face and decrees that Manaji is no longer his heir and that Tulaji has taken his place as next in line for Pirate Lord. So the mystery is solved, but a guard comes in and tells them that they are under attack. They immediately suspect Jack of betrayal, but then they find out it is the EITC attacking them, so they dismiss the accusation. Everyone gets ready to fight, and John, of course, is saddened that they can't eat breakfast first. Diego runs through the crowd looking for Carolina, and Marcella immediately latches on to him, telling him that she needs him to protect her. So Diego obliges and picks her up to find somewhere safe for her to hide. He then spots Carolina in the crowd, and she begins to run over to him. But out of nowhere, Marcella kisses Diego with Carolina watching. Diego is incredibly angry at this, and he throws Marcella on the ground and tries to get to Carolina. He then runs into Billy, and as they emerge outside, they see multiple EITC ships in the harbor and dozens of EITC agents storming the shore. Billy and Diego look for Jack, but they have no idea where he is. We then go over to Jack, who is in the kitchens, and he asks for the spiciest curry they have, and he runs out with it, a plan in mind. But before we find out what that plan is, we go back to Marcella, who goes into the temple where Barbara Huntington is hiding. She is still oblivious as to Barbara's real allegiance, so she tells her that she should escape these pirates on the EITC ships. Barbara thanks Marcella for being her friend, and she gives Marcella her mirror, telling her to think of her when she opens it, and to make sure she says where she is when she does so. After this, we see Diego in the gardens looking for Carolina, but he is distracted by Jack, who is carrying a pot of something. Diego follows him and sees that they are in the animal stall, and he comes face to face with an elephant. Jack tells Diego to help him free the animals, so Diego frees the 12 elephants, and Jack has them try the spicy curry he brought. As the elephants taste it, they begin to go wild, and Diego then runs out and alerts all the pirates the elephants are coming. All the pirates get out of the way, and Diego goes to look for Carolina. So let's go back into the book. "Where's Carolina?" Diego cried as they ran past him. "She was down on the dock," John called. "I don't know if she made it up." The earth was shaking as the elephant's galloping feet got closer and closer. Diego looked desperately down the stairs. The company agents were advancing with gleeful grins of triumph on their faces. They thought they had driven back the pirates. They were sure Sri Sumbhajee and his minions were giving up and running away. They had no idea the thundering sound they heard was not that of hundreds of pirates retreating. Finally, Diego spotted Carolina. She had her back to the Pearl, fighting right at the edge of the dock. Her sword flashed and her sari glowed in the sunlight. Her opponent was Benedict Huntington. "Carolina!" Diego yelled, hurtling down the stairs. The Marines didn't even try to stop him. They were too eager to get through the door into the prized inner sanctum of the notorious Sri Sumbhajee. Diego shoved his way through them and nearly tumbled headlong onto the stone dock. He drew his sword as he ran up behind Benedict. "I don't think so," said a cold voice as a blade appeared in his path. Diego skidded to a stop. Barbara Huntington stood at her husband's back, smiling maliciously at Diego. He'd have to get by her before he could help Carolina with Benedict. He saw Carolina take a step back. One more and she'd fall into the harbor, if Benedict's rapier didn't slip through her quick parries and kill her first. "Get out of my way," Diego said. "I'm afraid it's you who'll be getting out of our way," Barbara said. But as she stepped toward him, she glanced up and suddenly the smile dropped off her face. "Benedict?" she said, her voice rising. "Benedict!" Diego turned and saw what Jack had wrought. Marines and company agents were rushing headlong down the steps, shoving each other out of the way. Some were diving straight off the steps into the harbor. Others were trampling anyone who fell under their boots. All of them were shrieking with fear. At the top of the steps, an elephant was shoving itself through the doorway. Its mouth was open and its eyes were rolling. It was desperate to get to the cool water of the lake. It didn't care how many company men it had to run over to get there. 12 frantic elephants were behind that door, and all of them were stampeding straight toward Diego and Carolina. "Benedict, get me out of here!" Barbara screamed, grabbing her husband's coat and yanking him away from Carolina. There was nowhere to go but into the harbor. The walls along the sides of the steps created a perfect bottleneck for the elephants to trample through. Benedict's eyes were blazing. "This isn't over," he shouted, pointing at Carolina and Diego. He stumbled as Barbara physically hauled him backward, dragging him toward one of the rowboats at the end of the dock. She leaped in with him right behind her. "We'll be back! We will destroy Jack Sparrow! Nothing can stop us!" Benedict howled as Barbara grabbed the oars. 2 other agents tried to leap into the boat with them, but Barbara knocked them into the water with an oar. "There's no room!" she yelled, although there were plenty of seats in the boat. "We have to go!" She shoved the oars into Benedict's hands and she sat down, fuming, and began to row back to his ship. "Carolina!" Diego cried, catching her hand. "Up here!" she said, dragging him to the Pearl's gangplank. "Hurry!" All around them, men were hurling themselves into boats, or, when there wasn't enough space, directly into the harbor. As Carolina and Diego made it to the deck of the ship, a few agents tried to run up to the gangplank behind them. Side by side, the 2 teenagers drove them back with their swords. Diego parried and lunged, wobbling on the slant of the gangplank. Carolina whipped her sword in sharp spirals, her gold earrings glittering as they forced the men back step by step. Finally, the agents leaped into the water, and Diego and Carolina could run back on deck and pull the gangplank up out of the way. "Look," Diego said, pointing to the far outer wall of the island, where the hidden entrance was. Pirates were gathered at the top of the sheer stone precipice. They had dragged the curtain of moss over to this side of the wall and were standing with it raised over the only exit from the harbor. "Agents of the East India Trading Company!" a voice bellowed from behind them. Diego and Carolina whirled to see Sri Sumbhajee standing on top of the inner wall, flanked by Aske and Pusan. Below him, elephants were still pushing through the door and charging down the steps. Several of them were already in the harbor, dipping their trunks in the lake and spraying cool water over their backs. "Sri Sumbhajee demands you retreat at once," Aske roared. He was holding something up to his mouth that amplified his voice so it echoed across the harbor. "Or else Sri Sumbhajee will destroy you all." On board the Peacock, Benedict Huntington was hopping up and down and shaking his fist and shouting. No one could hear what he was saying. Aske continued, supremely indifferent to the agent's rage. "You may notice what these brave gentlemen of fortune are holding over your only exit," he went on. "Let me assure you that it is most flammable." The pirates holding the false moss curtain lifted torches alight with flame. Diego realized what they were threatening to do. If they lit the curtain on fire and dropped it into the lake, it would spread to the company's ships and set them all ablaze in minutes. The agents would be trapped between the fire and the elephants. Then again, so would Diego and Carolina aboard the Pearl. "Why doesn't he just do it?" Diego wondered aloud. "He could wipe out so many of their ships right here." Carolina nodded across the dock at the elegant ship opposite theirs. "He doesn't want to lose the Otter if he can avoid it, or clean up the mess of 100 burned ships and 1,000 drowned agents." "Do you think they'll leave?" Diego said. Carolina didn't answer. She stared out at the company's ships with a grim expression. "This is your last chance," Aske called. "Leave now or suffer a fiery, watery, or very flat death." For a long moment, it looked as if the ships would refuse to go. Benedict was stamping up and down the deck of the Peacock, clutching his hair. Barbara calmly walked past him to the wheel. She signaled the other sailors, and they raced to their positions. "They're going," Diego said. It was true. Seeing the Peacock do an about-face, the other ships dragged as many men from the water as they could and followed close behind them. One by one, the company ships sailed out of the harbor. Right under the hanging curtain, the pirates held menacingly over them. Relieved, Diego turned to hug Carolina, but she stepped out of reach of his arms and turned away. So the battle is over, and things are tense right now between Diego and Carolina. We see Jack sitting in Sri Sumbhajee's throne, and the pirate lord along with his aides come in, yelling at Jack. Askay and Pusan tell Jack to leave and never return, and Sri Sumbhajee storms out and goes through a door, and Jack goes and runs after him. Jack finds himself in a long corridor and comes into a room with a monkey statue. He sees a hidden door slam closed behind the statue, so Jack looks for the activation lever. After trying a whole bunch of things, he eventually leans on the monkey's tail, and that, of course, opens the door. So Jack makes his way through and goes up the stairs to find Sri Sumbhajee. So let's go back to the book. Jack padded quietly up the stairs, listening for the sound of Sri Sumbhajee above him. There was nowhere else the pirate lord could have gone. The stairs went up and up and up endlessly. Jack's legs started to hurt and his breath came in short gasps. Forget supernatural powers. Jack was more impressed by Sri Sumbhajee's stamina. Suddenly he spotted a light above him, and as he came around the last bend, he found himself climbing up into a small, circular marble room lined with enormous open windows facing in all directions. Jack made the mistake of looking out and down, and he had to close his eyes for a moment, his head reeling. When he opened them again, he realized where he was, inside the tall white spire that towered over the dome of Sri Sumbhajee's palace. It was astonishingly high. From up here, the view stretched all the way to Bombay and out into the ocean. You could see for miles and miles and miles. Which was precisely what Sri Sumbhajee was doing at that very moment. He was standing with his back to Jack, his eye pressed to a telescope mounted exactly at his height, staring out to sea. Jack followed his gaze and saw the East India Trading Company ships sailing back to Bombay. "Aha!" Jack said. "So that's how you do it." Sri Sumbhajee whirled around, his face contorting with shock. Jack waved his hand at the spyglass in the surrounding ocean. "You've got a nice little secret setup here. That's how you can see anyone coming. For instance, my ship. Pity you didn't stop by here earlier this morning, isn't it?" Sri Sumbhajee's glare could have melted bronze. "And what's over here?" Jack went on, pointing to a row of little cones set up on the floor. Tubes ran from each one of the wall. Jack picked up the first cone and held it to his ear. He heard, "But Lakshmi, I don't want to leave you here." It was John's voice. "I can't go with you," Lakshmi answered, "but I will tell everyone what you told me about the Shadow Lord. I'll make sure Sri Sumbhajee fights against the Shadow Army when it rises. Or if he won't, I'll lead the battle myself. And then I'll be free, John. Completely free. If we both survive, will you come back for me?" "I will." Jack put the cone down hurriedly. He didn't need to hear any smooching noises. "You're spying on your own courtiers," Jack observed, grinning at Sri Sumbhajee. "Classy. So much for those supernatural powers of yours." "I told you to get out of my court!" Sri Sumbhajee barked. Jack reeled back in surprise. The pirate lord's voice was high and squeaky, like a 4-year-old girl's. It wasn't ominous or commanding, nothing like any other pirate lord's voice. No wonder he only spoke through his aides. Jack made a few peculiar faces, trying to hide his grin. "As you command," he said with a little bow. "But I have a proposal for you first. I won't tell the world about the secret behind your supernatural powers, or your little girl voice. In exchange, you give me the vial of shadow gold you received not too long ago." He held up his thumb and forefinger. "It's about yay big and has shiny, glowy stuff inside. You can hand that over now, and then we'll be on our merry way. Savvy?" Sri Sumbhajee glowered at him. "I do have supernatural powers," he squeaked. "I just used this room for backup." "I'm sure you do," Jack said, holding out his hand. "Vial, please." "I knew you were here for something," Sri Sumbhajee growled. "Jack Sparrow is out for himself and no one else." Jack sighed. "Pirate. Getting tired of explaining that, mate. I'd have thought you'd understand. Oh, and it's Captain Jack Sparrow, by the way." Scowling, Sri Sumbhajee reached up and plucked a vial out of one of the folds of his turban. He held it in his hand for a moment, watching the shimmering liquid slide slowly up and down. What is it? He asked. What's it for? Fighting evil, Jack said blithely, lifting it out of Sri Sumbhajee's hand. Saving the world. Something along those lines. It'll all be much clearer when the Shadow Lord tries to kill us all. He tucked the vial into his vest pocket. My thanks, good sir, he said, flourishing his hat with a deep bow. Sri Sumbhajee moved to shove Jack out of one of the windows, but Jack was used to leaping out of harm's way. Tut tut, Jack said, smiling as he made a hasty exit. Jack found his crew gathered in the outer gardens, ready to leave. Did you get the vial? Carolina said. She was back in her pirate clothes again. Jack held up the shadow gold proudly. It's beautiful, she said. Did you have to duel him for it like Mistress Ching? Sure, Jack said. It was very dangerous and frightening. Not only does his beard tell all, he has a mind of his own. It grew an extra 10 meters and wrapped itself around me. I struggled, but to no avail. Eventually, I was able to slice away at it. Pray you never hear a beard scream in agony. Makes a mate never want to shave or get another haircut. At which point, I reached out and grabbed for the shadow gold. But just as I had my fingers wrapped tightly around it, the notorious Sri sliced my hand clear from my wrist. I raised my arm, sprayed the pirate lord with the blood that was pulsing from my wrist, grabbed the shadow gold, stowed it, grabbed my severed hand, reattached it with the help of a healing potion reserved for severed digits, appendages, and limbs, and well, here we are. Finally, we can get out of this cursed place, Barbossa growled, touching his stomach gingerly and like the rest of the crew, ignoring Jack's tall tale. A pox on this entire court. Someone ate too many mangoes, Billy whispered to Jack. I liked it here, Marcella announced. It's pretty. There are lots of jewels. Even though it's full of nasty pirates, it's not nearly as dirty as a ship. You're welcome to stay, Jack suggested. Nay, I'd say, encouraged to stay. Marcella stuck out her tongue at him. She tried to take Diego's arm, but he moved away from her, casting a glance at Carolina, who was ignoring them both. Jean, meanwhile, was saying goodbye to Lakshmi. The warrior girl had taken off her mask and was holding her hands in his. Don't forget, she said. I won't, Jean said. I'll come back for you. Mysterious, Jack muttered. A girl falling for John instead of Jack? What was the world coming to? Barbossa was already stamping across the grass toward the harbor in the safety of the Black Pearl. The crew followed him. Jack stopped to cast a longing glance back at the temple, rising up through the trees. No, Jack, Carolina said, steering him around. We have what we need. Leave the ruby alone. I suppose it'll still be here next time I'm sailing around the world, Jack said with a shrug. I'm sure it'll be much harder to get into Savarnadurg next time, Diego said. I heard the pirates planning new strategies of defense already. They were talking about walling up the harbor and building an entirely new one on the other side of the island. Jack shook his head as they walked down the stairs. He gazed lovingly at the Black Pearl, bobbing quietly in the water ahead of them. Having a palace and a fort isn't how a real pirate should live. A real pirate needs to smell the sea and to feel the wind in his hair. He needs to move quickly and take his world with him wherever he goes. He has everything he wants right there in the boards and beams of his ship. Carolina smiled at Jack. That's the kind of pirate I want to be, she said, as soon as we're done with this quest and have defeated the Shadow Lord. Jack patted the vial, safe in the pocket of his vest. 3 down, he said to himself. 3 more to go. Okay, so hopefully you enjoyed my Sri Sumbhajee voice, but after this we have a short epilogue, and we see Benedict crashing out in the cabin of the HMS Peacock, and he throws a chair across the room. He is annoyed that all their plans are ruined, but Barbara tells him about what she has up her sleeve. So let's go back to the book one last time. Don't be so melodramatic, Benny, Barbara said, patting her hair. You should know by now I always think of everything. Hand me your mirror, will you? Benedict pulled the silver mirror out of his vest pocket and handed it to her. Why? He asked. What happened to yours? Barbara rubbed the glass of the mirror 3 times in a clockwise direction. Well, my goodness, she said. Will you look at that? Benedict peered over her shoulder. In the mirror he could see the mast of a ship, and above it a black sail. Is that? He started. Marcella's face suddenly appeared, extremely close to the mirror, and both husband and wife recoiled. Marcella seemed to be checking her teeth, grinning ghoulishly at the mirror and turning from side to side. She couldn't see the couple watching her from the other side. I'm waiting for Diego to come down from the crow's nest, she whispered to the mirror. He's been hiding up there because Carolina is mad at him, but I'm going to show him he doesn't need any stupid Spanish princess when he's got me. Barbara looked up at Benedict, her green eyes glinting dangerously. Spanish princess, she echoed. Didn't we hear something about a missing Spanish princess from that Portuguese trader? Benedict rubbed his chin. I do remember something like that, he said. Perhaps we should see if the Spanish would like to be of assistance in our search, Barbara mused. They're none too fond of pirates either, if I've heard correctly. I have another idea, Benedict offered, strolling to his desk. He pulled out a letter scrawled on creamy white parchment and handed it to his wife. I've received a most interesting offer. Barbara smiled, holding the letter delicately with her red nails. The Shadow Lord, she murmured. I think our plans may be complementary, my dear. Look at the watermark. He took the letter back from her and held it up to the light. His face darkened. Villanueva's crest, he spat. The Spanish pirate lord, Barbara confirmed. There are secrets within secrets here. I think we could use some of those to our advantage. Jack! Husband and wife turned back to the mirror, which Marcella was now holding up so she could examine her hair from the top of her head. Behind her, they could see Billy Turner striding across the deck toward Jack Sparrow. Jack! Billy called again. Diego spotted land ahead. It's too soon, Jack called back. We'll stop for water, but not for long. He passed one hand over his brow, looking a little hunted. Hector, how long till we arrive in Madagascar? Contented smiles spread across the faces of both Huntingtons. Benedict kissed his wife's hand and headed for the door to give his crew their new heading. All right, and that is the end of Legends of the Brethren Court, Book 3, The Turning Tide. This one is very fun, and it is great to learn a lot more about Sri Sumbhajee and his family. And as we just learned there, the Pearl is headed to Madagascar. And the next book is very, very exciting. Book 4 is named Wild Waters, and the Black Pearl is headed to Madagascar and Africa to get the vial of shadow gold from the current pirate lord of the Atlantic Ocean. But to do so, Jack is going to need help from the pirate lord of Madagascar, who is none other than his own father, Edward Teague. And we are also headed to a very famous and popular legendary pirate hideout too, but I won't spoil what that is yet. Hopefully you join me next time for Book 4, as it is very fun and there's a lot of great characters who will show up. But I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you have rated or reviewed the podcast, thank you so much. We are over halfway through the series now with only 2 books left, so I hope you join me next time for Wild Waters and some more Jack Sparrow family drama. Thank you so much for listening. I will see you all next time. Take care. Podcast of the Caribbean is in no way affiliated with Disney. If you want to send me an email or a question, you can send it over to podcastofthecaribbean@gmail.com. You can also follow this podcast on Instagram and Threads at Podcast of the Caribbean, and over on Twitter/X and Bluesky at PodcastPOTC. I post fun content and trivia over there, so make sure to check those platforms out. You can also buy merchandise for the podcast over on Dashery. Be sure to keep a weather eye on the horizon, and always remember, dead men tell no tales.